There you go.
All right, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. I believe we have quorum, 2, 4, 6, 8 of us, as well as our lovely guests. Starting out, I'd like to review the agenda, and unless there are any objections, move on to commissioner comments. All right, seeing no objections, just to run through it real quick for everybody in the audience. We have 3 main things today. Introduction of Captain Sean Adams, temporary custody of juveniles as our discussion, and then a little history lesson for our diversity, equity, and inclusion quarterly speaker. So, starting off with comments, do you want to start us off, Bill?
I just want to welcome everybody. I know it's a busy time of year, and I appreciate everybody showing up today. Thank you, and welcome to our captain, which we'll learn more about in a little while.
Oh, I do not have comments.
Nor do I.
I have a comment. I was pleased to see the little news article on TV about the drone program. I thought it was very nice. With one little note that I thought gave me a different feeling, and that was, there was passing mention of the possibility that we would get little bitty drones that could fly in the window and look in your rooms, and and that was just in passing, but I thought, really? And I guess I doubt the wisdom of mentioning that in this presentation. It's needless, and it rings the wrong bells for too many people. Otherwise, I thought it was great, and I really like the public presence that the police department seems to be getting more of in recent times. I think it's terrific. And this was terrific, too. So
Thanks, Will.
Public comment, Matt?
No problem. Sorry for being late.
Pete?
I saw Chief. The Chief was at the Lions Club. As always, he gave a very good presentation. Everybody seemed to enjoy it and learn a lot from it. That's it.
Sweet. Silver?
I don't remember them saying fly in the window. I don't remember that part. But yeah, it was good coverage.
yeah.
Thank you.
I'll have a comment.
Yeah, okay.
So I'll pass that to you.
Sorry I wasn't here last month.
Yeah, I don't specifically remember that they put a fleeting comment in about it. There was some discussion about what new products are out there, and it's not teeny tiny, and it's not like a hummingbird that can silently wisp in. There was more discussion about it. There is a smaller product out there that's more stable for being able to help with building clears, so like warehouses or a barricaded person where you can try to help kind of get in and look around. Unfortunately, it was 45 minutes of discussion about stuff that made its way into about a minute and 40 seconds worth of stuff, and so.
Yeah.
But it's good. I'm gonna go back and watch it again and see, because it didn't blip me. It doesn't ring a bell for how exactly they talked about that.
Okay.
But that's good feedback. Thank you.
And for my comment, I was at a Wake Up Eugene discussion. I was really impressed by the chief's comments about restorative justice, helping solve these problems. And with that, let's move on to the approval of the November notes. I read through them already. I didn't see anything other than scrivener. But I'll give everybody else a minute to look through them as well. Oh, thank you. Before that, actually, we need to do public comments as well. I totally moved that on accident. Do we have any public comments on the
I do have one.
Okay.
So what we'll have is public comments. We'll try to find room maybe next to Silver, between Silver and V. You have 3 minutes to speak. I'll let you know when you have 20 seconds left, and then let you know when your 3 minutes is up. And we have one speaker, Zachary Visanoff. Did I say that right?
Yeah, it'd be good if I could be at the end of the table. That that way I can see everyone. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I haven't talked to the police commission in many years, basically stopped doing so because mainly the move out here. I ride a skateboard, and trying to fight that is, I mean, I like to testify to the police commission, but it's not worth dying for. So that's a real deterrent. I urge you guys, that you've seen the problems downtown. It's a fiasco. I mean, it's a mess. And there's a transit station there. There's plenty of venues available, whether it's eWeb, the Atrium Building, Harris Hall, or the library. So, just the fact that, public involvement is on your agenda tonight, and it's like, well, the low-hanging fruit is you meet with them whenever you have a meeting, and then all the other stuff is a bonus. And so, as far as I'm concerned, having meetings here is really avoiding the public. And I think that's, it's very sad and divisive. I think that the tax policy we've got going with this payroll tax, public safety is kind of this extra sidecar budget. It should have been part of the core mission. And I feel really bad that the EPD had to get involved and say, look, we can't come out to calls, we don't have the money, please pass this extra tax, when people would expect that basic public safety comes way before bike lanes, way before all this stuff. It's such a basic thing. It's like police, pipes, and it's just one of these core things. And so I think you've accidentally alienated quite a few people in the public. I don't know if any of you went to that payroll tax hearing. And also, in closing, Autzen Game Day was one thing that EPD once urged the city council to make a drinking district, because they said, well, we can't chase all these open containers. I urge you to rein that in or have public hearings or something, because it's an unfunded disaster. I think it's a drunk driving disaster. And I realize the U of O has all the power in the world, and they can just drink. Well, because by opening up the parking lot to drinking, you've made people run across town drinking the whole way, fighting along the way. I realize you guys make a lot of extra overtime there. It's a kind of a cash cow, but it doesn't make any sense. It's a disaster. So please consider revisiting that at a future meeting, preferably downtown at one of those venues. And there may be some kind of 50-50 approach you can get where there's pockets of open container and then the rest of the community can be safe, because it's kind of spiraled out of control. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zachary.
As a point of information, when is our atrium meeting downtown?
So that is in the summer, and which one of those months?
All right. We will be having a meeting downtown in the summer.
Okay.
So thank you so much for your comments.
No problem. We have another speaker, Charmaine Reg. Would you like to join us down there? And you'll have 3 minutes. I'll let you know when you have 20 seconds left.
Hi. I think this is a great location, because almost all the meetings, all kinds of meetings are at Harris Hall and at the Atrium, and sometimes over at Peterson Barn. And this is on the bus line. You've got a parking lot. You don't have to have on-street parking. So I'm really glad that it's here. The main reason that I came is I see that the State Land Board yesterday made permanent the camping ban along the river and on the islands within the city of Eugene and also Swan Island area in Portland. I am so happy. I am ecstatic over this. Just the other day when it wasn't raining, I rode my bike and had to call in 3 illegal sites just between McMinimans and Valley River Inn on the north bank, and there were just, it was either ODOT or Sheriff's Work Crew. I saw the trucks 2 weeks in a row there, and then it's just a mess afterwards. I've called in chop shops in that area, as well as many other areas along the river. So I take it personally. I love the area. It's beautiful. I don't want it trashed. I don't want kids stepping on needles and people can't go into the water and it's a mess. I've seen it all the way up, falling onto the bike path to shopping carts. In fact, there's still some under the 105 North Bank, under the pilings there. And I want to go on a bike ride and not have to call EPD, Parks, ODOT. I'm sick of it. I have zero tolerance for it, and I wish it went all the way up through the whole Willamette River, up the Mackenzie, into the National Forest, all of it. But the one reason that I came, I want to find out, so how's that protocol going to work? Is it going to go through dispatch? And then you guys, kind of like how you're doing now, you work with ODOT, if it's their property, maybe with in Sheriff's Work Crew, first officer goes out, if there's somebody in the tents, and then let's say it's on Parks comes in. Also, that piece of land between, this always is bugging, because that piece of land between McMinimans and Valley River Inn is ODOT's, and it's been in transition forever to be turned to Parks. It really should be. Parks comes through there every day. At least the park ambassadors, you know. What did that sign say? I'm done.
20 seconds.
Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
So
for your
very
comments.
sorry.
All right, unless there are any more, now we will move on to approving the minutes, or the notes from last time. Unless there are any objections, can I get a motion for that?
I'll motion to approve the meeting notes from November 14th.
Second.
Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Awesome.
Sean, abstain,
Fine.
so I wasn't
Because you
here.
weren't there. Well, we still have quorum, so that is okay. Thank you so much. Now we'll move straight on to the Captain Sean Adams introduction. Chief, if you want to-
Sure, I'll kick this off, and I may, she doesn't even look at me. See, this is the way this relationship works. She doesn't look at me when she knows that I'm going to put her on the spot. Yeah, I'm happy to introduce Sean Adams. Just as a matter of history, the Eugene Police Department recently has had 3 captains and no deputy chief. When I came in April of 2018, for an agency our size to not have a deputy chief that basically runs the operations is unheard of. But we also recognize that we're big enough and growing, as you know, that having 3 sworn captains is a better span of control when it comes to levels of accountability within the organization. And so for those of you that haven't met Stacy Jepson, she is our deputy chief. She is somebody that she's basically the brains of the outfit, let's just put it that way. And she runs the entire operations of the organization, which allows me to do the things that, like being able to see V during my week, or being able to see Sean. I mean, those are the things that your chief should be doing, is out in the community talking about the vision and the direction we're going. And Stacy stays here on the home front and makes sure the trains are running on time with a variety of different areas, patrol, investigations, and our ops support, which is like our records, CSOs, animal welfare. And so we went out for a recruitment for a captain. It was both internal and external. It was a very competitive process, and we were happy to have Sean on board. He's been here for just a few weeks now, so he's still drinking from a fire hose. But Sean comes to us from Salem Police Department. And he has a daughter that just started at University of Oregon, and a son that's in graduate school at University of Washington. And so he's been in law enforcement for well over 25 years, and has just, in the last, 12 12 or 13 or some odd years you've been a lieutenant in Salem, right? I mean, it's been a long time. So he comes with a depth of experience. And the one thing that I do appreciate about building an organization is, as much as we work on succession planning and trying to find individuals that can take significant leadership roles within an organization, it also is very healthy to have an external perspective. And so if you think about external perspective, what sits in front of you is 3 outsiders that are bringing a different point of view, a different lens, and different creative ideas to the Eugene Police Department. I think that's healthy. And so we're really excited to have Sean. And so I'll let Stacy off the hook. She doesn't have to say anything. Unless she
I'll
has
say something.
There you go.
I will. I'm very pleased to have Sean here. I mean, it's been 9 months since I've been here, and just trying to get grounded for myself and acclimated, and to finally solidify our senior leadership team and move the chess pieces where they need to be organizationally is a really good feeling. Obviously, we're embarking on a lot of change in the organization and in the community, and I think having some solidified, stable leadership at the top of an organization of our size is super important. Sean did go through a very robust, comprehensive process. Thank you, Bill, for being part of that. There was many layers to that. We had a stakeholder component of the process. And then he had to go through the gauntlet of the association, and then the senior leadership team, as well as a comprehensive background and psychological evaluation. And we're just tickled to have him. The one thing I will say right off the bat about him is that his enthusiasm is contagious. He's very excited to be here, and I'll let him say that himself here in a second. But the other byproduct of this for me is it's just nice to not be the new person anymore. He is, so that's super nice and comforting, and I'm just excited to have his wisdom, his depth of experience, and he's going to be overseeing our investigations division. And there's just going to be a lot of analysis and heavy lifting in the future for us to grow as a department and get better at what we do. And I think he'll provide a good lens for that. And now I'll let you say a few words.
Oh, thank you. Humbled by that. Yeah, I know it's, I refer to myself sometime as being annoyingly positive, so if you get around me too long, I may annoy you because I am that way. But just understand that is the way I am. I mean, I'm wired that way, I'm built that way, and I couldn't be happier or be more excited to be with this agency. And just to share a story, I guess, when I was leaving my former agency, everybody looked at me like, "What are you doing?" Because I had a pretty good job, and I said, "Well, you know, you look at the city of Eugene, you look at what's happening, and you look at the chief and the deputy chief that are in position, you look at the community safety initiative, and what you see is an agency that's going like this. The trajectory is huge. The ceiling, I believe, is unlimited, and the community support is tremendous because it's evidenced by the fact of, I mean, the initiative was supported by our Chamber of Commerce and it was supported by the City Council and passed. And so those are all barometers of really very healthy organizations that are on very good trajectory. So truly, I'm blessed and honored to be here and beyond happy, really. So I look forward to the future, and geez, thanks for the nice comments, you guys. I mean, you know, it's, I'm not sure I deserve all that, but thank you.
Sure you
So,
do.
anyway, that's kind of me in a nutshell. So, yeah.
We have a few minutes. Does anybody have any questions?
Come on, don't
That easy.
So,
Yeah.
I know that you had a working relationship with the chief before you came. Was there any connection that you had with the?
No, sir. No, I cold tapped the chief before I put in and said, "Hey, can I meet with you?" And we spent an hour, 90 minutes, and I will tell you, and I don't know that I've shared this with Chief Skinner, I came away from that meeting going, "Oh, it's on." No, seriously, man. You know, just the conversation, philosophy, ideologically, I found myself very much aligned with Chief Skinner, and I'm like, "This is where I'm going, so I want to work." So,
Cool.
Lindsay next.
I don't know anything about Salem's Police Department, but do you have civilian oversight like here? And if so, what was your experience interfacing with civilian oversight?
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that. Yes. So it's a little different than what you would see here, but yes, it was civilian advisory, and there was civilian oversight. So just to kind of differentiate the two, in Salem, there was what was referred to as a Citizens Police Advisory Committee, and that was not a formalized committee, but it was very much like this committee, very diverse community or committee made up of community members from all over the place. And they would come in and sit, and they would advise on policy, they would advise on procedures. But the really cool part was that that group could actually a little more informally advise the chief of police in particular what the community feeling was on issues or areas. And that was, having been there, I will tell you, at times, that was pretty blunt. But this kind of thing you need to hear as a chief of police in an organization. If you're not fulfilling the expectations, that's how you get the feedback. And that was great. The civilian oversight per se was, there's a Citizen Police Review Board, and that is a board very much like what we have here, that if we did not have an auditor in Salem, internal affairs were handled internally, but that was the mechanism to ensure we had some oversight and impartiality into the investigation. So very similar. I'm still spooling up and understanding the auditor role. It's a little bit different to me, but the form and process of everything is still the same. So yeah.
Did you have body cams in Salem?
No. Yeah, no. There was a few in-car video cameras, but not a tremendous amount. And just to touch on that while we're speaking of it, for Salem, it wasn't that we did not recognize that there was a need for body cams, and we've seen how tremendous that can be. And I would personally love to have one. But what we found was the cost of the storage of the data was so astronomical that in Salem, we could not incur that into our budget to make that happen. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Good question. I'll take one. What's most exciting about the move down here?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I've not officially moved, but if we talk about the professional move, I will tell you that's one's real easy, and that's the people. So I came from an agency that was very much family first, very family orientated, very, very much core value for the Salem Police Department. I thought that was probably what I was going to step into here, but it has been beyond my expectations. The people have been fabulous. The organization's been tremendous. When you come in, and I guess the two chiefs can attest to this, when you come in from an outside agency into a new agency, of course, first of all, you're going to get eyeballed by all the cops, like, well, all right, here's another new cop. And by the way, I got called a boot the other day, which is really funny because that's an affectionate term for a recruit officer. So that was pretty funny. I got a good laugh out of that. So I'm like, yeah, I've reverted back, 27 years now? That was cool. But the people have been fabulous, and I had high expectations coming into this agency about what that transition would look like, what the friendships would be that I built, and without exception, everything has exceeded in that regard. So that has been, police work is kind of police work, but that piece has been tremendous.
Chief Skinner has a truck, as I understand, so to help with that move.
Well,
Volunteering.
Everybody asks me about the move. So, we're in kind of a little bit, my wife's a reading specialist for the Salem-Keizer School District, and very, very deeply engaged in Chavez Elementary School, as am I. Right from the point that school opened, we've been very engaged with that school. And I'm not sure what we're going to do at the end of the school year. There's some tough conversations coming around the Adams household, but it's a difficult conversation because it's a commutable distance, and now I'm in a place where I'm having to tell my wife, hey, I took this awesome new job, so you're going to have to leave yours. So I'm not sure what we're going to do. My preference would be to entirely move down here, so that would make my life a lot easier.
But his daughter doesn't want him to move down.
That makes sense.
She wants some distance.
Finally just got out of the house.
Yeah. Her visions, I'm going to be in a patrol car outside her dorm room every night. Seriously, man. Come on.
Well, unless there are any other questions, I know the chief has a prior engagement tonight as well. So move straight along to the chief's report.
Thank you. First of all, let me apologize for it being 65 degrees in here. It's been, this building has been interesting in the sense that we can't seem to get the HVAC figured out. The other day I came in and my office was 63. Remember that day? Holly's office, who is really the glue that holds me together. She was at 59 degrees. But then Melinda on the other side of her was at 76 degrees in there. And so it's just been kind of crazy. So I apologize for that. And I also apologize for stepping out. We have the NAMI Awards tonight, the banquet tonight, and we have Officer Joe Kidd being recognized by NAMI for great work that he's done. And so I want to be there to support Joe Kidd. And so that's why they kind of bumped me up in the schedule a little bit, and that I'm going to be stepping out and leaving the chief and the captain behind to kind of field any questions that we have. In the way of chief's report, I will tell you that almost all of the energy that I've had recently has been around preparing for this upcoming budget season. Lots of budget meetings. We're getting ready to go to council with supplemental budget coming up, and that'll be any budget adjustments that we make right at the first of the year that carry us through the end of this particular fiscal year, which is FY20, fiscal year 20, and building what fiscal year 21 looks like as it pertains to not only the general fund, but what we're calling Fund 136, which is now going to be the Community Safety Initiative Fund. Those are housed separately, and if you remember, as we've talked about this, that's purposeful, and that's written into the ordinance language that money that we get through payroll tax is being kept in a separate fund and being accounted for in many different ways, up to and including an advisory board and an audit to make sure that it's promises made, promises kept around what we're doing with payroll tax funding. And so a lot of discussions around that, a lot of discussions around the administration of the payroll tax and how we're as a city are going to take a leadership role in working with some third-party vendors and software companies on how we can start collecting the payroll tax and trying to identify the date by which we think we can start collecting the first revenues out of payroll tax, and trying to marry that up with a hiring strategy and a recruitment and hiring strategy that allows for some good momentum as we go into that season of hiring. We have 7 new police officers starting with us on January 6th, I believe. We've got a couple of vacancies from some retirement. Jen Bill stepped away, as you may have known, this last fall. And then a couple of recruits that were really struggling in FTEP, which is Field Training and Evaluation Program, with their coaches, that we exercised our right on probation to separate them from employment. They're generally speaking, when we do that, it's not necessarily about disciplinary issues, it's about competency issues and whether or not they're able to live up to really the high standards that we have in FTEP and the Eugene Police Department. And so we have a couple of vacancies. So with the 7 that come on, we'll be back fully staffed and overhired by, I think, 2-ish officers, which is kind of is a sweet spot for us as we continue to keep the momentum. And then when we're able to start looking at what community safety initiative means for hiring, we're able to just kind of roll right into that recruitment and start doing that. We are open right now yet for another recruitment. I don't know if it's not open now, it's opening any day now, and we're going to take the first 130 candidates that come to us. We're averaging about anywhere from 5 to 10 days before we get 100 candidates, and we have to shut it down. So still a lot of strong momentum around wanting to be a part of the Eugene Police Department, which is really, really good, and we're getting some really good candidates. The last couple of classes, even though we lost a few in FTEP because of some competency things, it's tough in a hiring process to fully vet whether they're going to be able to be well equipped to deal with the things that they see. There's just no way to test for how you handle certain stresses and how you handle certain critical incidents that you may have to deal with. But what we try to do is we make sure that we spend all of our time hiring around character and those types of character-based traits that we're looking for. And all of the people that we've hired, we feel really, really good about the character of the individual, and very sad about the fact that they weren't able to live up to the expectations on their competency. And so we're looking forward to this next group that's coming on. It's a good blend of brand new cops, baby cops, and some laterals. One of the laterals, at least one is a local, which helps because they hit the ground running a whole lot quicker than the other ones that have to go to the academy. But we'll be sending a group off to the academy in the not so distant future after we train them up a little bit with our in-house academy beforehand. And so that's kind of some things that are on our minds. I will tell you that I'm fully engaged with a lot of different stakeholder groups. One of which is paying attention to kind of this new Wake Up Eugene. I don't know if I want to call it a movement, but I will call it a group of concerned and engaged citizens that meet periodically and trying to provide not anything other than just context around what it is we're facing and maybe more specifically what it is we can and can't do constitutionally, legally, morally, ethically. We want to make sure that they have good information because as you can imagine when a bunch of people sit in a room and try and come up with solutions on how we can solve a variety of problems, sometimes those solutions, while creative, are not necessarily achievable under the constraints of point of law or constitutionality. So I try to create some context for them to be able to do that. And then just a lot of community outreach for me lately. A lot of meeting with the Lions Club, and I've been to a couple of different neighborhood association meetings. I'm working closely with our University of Oregon partners on the upcoming 2020 Olympic trials and 2021, which is around the corner, being engaged in what that looks like. We had the first discussions today about what a festival-style atmosphere is going to mean for Eugene and how we host a big festival on our new waterfront park or riverfront park that will be here in time. And so there's a lot of really good, exciting things that are happening that your chief is staying engaged in and trying to be value added in those discussions. So with that, before I take off, let me just stop there and see if there's maybe any questions that I can answer.
I have Bill on the queue first.
Okay.
So just a couple comments. I'm happy to hear that we're having that many people apply for the jobs, since we are going to have even more hiring. And I also am very happy to hear that we, it's kind of sad to say it, but that we do have recruits that we recognize do not fit within our department, and we let them go. Because a lot of times when you're hiring at the rate that we're going to be and have been, you sometimes overlook going, well, at least it's a position we're keeping filled. I appreciate the job that your group is doing to say, hey, if it doesn't work, we need to move on and hire another person. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Bill.
I've got myself and then V. Do I see your hand? Right. I was going to ask how many of the recruits do we lose in that competency phase?
Sure.
On average.
It's funny because I just asked the question. It felt like we were having quite a few of them that we were having this difficult conversation with. So I asked for that historical look. And right now, historically, we've been averaging anywhere from 15 to 70% washout rate. I think this short-term snapshot of the last few classes, I think we've bumped up close to 20, but that's not unusual to have anywhere from a 10 to 20% washout rate for recruits. And so, and especially for when you move to, it's a catch-22. You either can hire for character and know that a person of great character sometimes can't assimilate to the tough parts of the job that you have to be able to do, or you can hire for job skills and know that they're not going to be the ambassadors that you want and the guardians you want in your community. And so the philosophy that I espouse is that I'm going to hire the right human being and teach you how to be a cop, instead of going the other way around. I don't want to hire cops and then trying to teach them how to be good human beings. And so that's what you find when you do that. And so I'm okay with that. And Bill, I appreciate your comments. It's important to us that we don't get out over our skis on trying to meet some metric around the number of people we hire at the expense of the reputation of this organization and the service to this community. And so that's what we keep at the forefront of our decision making.
Thank you so much. Unless there are any other questions, we will let you get to NAMI.
I'll go to NAMI and see how that goes. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chief. They're in your very capable hands, Chief.
I think I'm in theirs.
All right. With that, we will be moving on to the temporary custody of juveniles.
Yeah, so I actually have Sergeant Brian Nelson come up here too and take the chief spot.
The name tag, though. Don't want that stuff.
So this isn't actually a policy review. This was on the commission's agenda as a topic to discuss and review. The policy, as you would have noticed, was actually updated earlier this year, and that was for legal updates. You probably will have also noticed that there's a lot of it is just governed by ORS. It's a lot of regurgitating ORS, and it's a pretty extensive policy. And so we get audited or inspected routinely by the Oregon, no, I'm not going to come up with it, juvenile something or other. Basically comes down and reviews our custody location, so the cells and our processes and our policy, and then he kicks us things that need to be adjusted. And so that's why that was reviewed recently. There were just minor legal updates that were done at that time. But the bigger question was, or the bigger discussion that the commission was interested in, was just how we interact with juveniles. And so as we were planning the meeting, it seemed like no better person than to have one of our SRO representatives come and talk, because that's all they do. So that's what Sergeant Nelson's here to do, and I asked him to kind of give an overview of how they interact with kids and under what circumstances and what it looks like and how they work with the schools. And so just an informal kind of discussion about their program and how things work. So
perfect.
So
I know it's informal, like you said, so if at any point in time you guys have questions, feel free to interrupt and ask questions. I supervise our SRO, so I can give you, my perspective is going to be a lot around how we deal with things in the schools. And I think that it's, from what I've seen at least, it's usually, it's pretty consistent with what's happening on the streets as well. Within the schools, I have 5 people on my team, so I have one in each one of the high schools, and they are responsible for that high school and then all of the feeder schools that go into it. So as you can imagine, they're moving around quite a bit with only 5. And between Bethel and 4J, there's approximately 22,000 kids between the 2 districts and 5 people to support that. So we stay pretty busy. A lot of time in the high school and the middle schools, not so much in the elementary schools and primary schools, although we do end up getting into those areas too. And some examples of the stuff that we're working with is, kids who are either out of control. Like today we had one of the schools, the district has a policy where they can't put hands on the kids. And so one of the issues that we run into and they run into, and it's kind of one of those things where it happens to us a lot in law enforcement, is we end up being the Band-Aid in between, because they say I can't do this and somebody else says they can't do it, so let's call the police. And so like today we had 2 6-year-old kids, or 8-year-old kids, I'm sorry, who were disruptive and ran out of the school. Principal followed him out, wouldn't listen to him, so he ends up having to call the police for us to come over and take hold of these kids so they don't hurt themselves or run into traffic, because they were headed towards traffic areas and stuff. So just kind of giving you a broad overview first of what we do, and then I'll break down into the custody portions of it and how we do our interviews and stuff. But a majority of the stuff that they're dealing with is within the high schools and middle schools for the most part. We have an MOU with the school district, so we're dealing with, basically it mirrors pretty much our policy in most aspects of it as far as how we interact with kids. Our goal is to have positive interactions as much as possible, but obviously we get called by administrators and school officials when kids are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and we have to take enforcement action with them too. But the goal, even with the enforcement action, is to follow it up with how do we fix this problem? How do we make this better? Are there family issues that we can deal with? Are there folks that we can talk to that have resources that are available for either the kids or the family or both? So we're always kind of looking at that angle of it. When we're interviewing kids, as the policy states here, even in the schools, our agreement is that if the kid, if the juvenile is not expected to get in trouble, any legal trouble, or they're not looking at them from a perspective of they're going to get citations or arrests for something, then we won't necessarily contact parents. Sometimes we do in some cases, and usually that's left up to the school district to decide if they want to do that. But in most cases, that's not what we'll do. However, if we're in a situation where we think a kid could potentially be getting in trouble, or we're going to be interviewing them around a crime, then we call parents and we give them what we consider a reasonable amount of time to respond to the school district, or to the school if they choose to do so. Some parents don't. And that's usually right around 20 to 30 minutes, roughly, for somebody to get there. If there's extenuating circumstances and they're like, hey, I'm going to be 35 or 40 minutes, then we usually will work around that. I mean, we want to make sure that the kiddo has somebody there that they're comfortable with when we're talking to them, because sometimes that can be a scary situation for a younger kid. And then the other piece is we always have a school administrator or somebody who they feel comfortable with them, and we do that with witnesses too, so we make sure that they have somebody there that's not just the officer and a kid sitting there talking. So that way, two things: the district can get information about what might be going on in their school, which is important for them to make decisions on how they can improve or how they may need to deal with a discipline issue or something along those lines. And the other is just to make sure that the kid feels comfortable and doesn't feel like, the police are there and it's just the two of them in this interrogation or something. Our team recently, so this is kind of specific to us, but we just recently went through a training up in Wilsonville this last week, and it's called OC Fit training, which is, we all go by acronyms so much, so I try to remember the whole thing. Oregon Child Forensic Interview Techniques, because it's well known that there are very different ways to interview kids than it is to interview adults, and so we want to make sure that we're following best practice. And I don't know, I'm not sure if Hillsborough was, but I don't know of any other districts, to my knowledge, that have all of their SROs trained to do that. And so I thought it was a really important thing to further us and to make us better, and to develop those relationships with kids too, because what we're really looking for is for them to have the idea that, the police are here to help. We're here to, yes, you may get in trouble at times, but we're going to treat you fairly, we're going to be respectful, and we want to make sure that we pass that on and help them to understand all those things that way. So that was a super beneficial training. Most of the time, we're citing kids. We're very rarely taking kids into custody, like physical custody. Two reasons. But biggest one is that, unless there's a big concern for somebody's immediate safety, we don't want to be putting kids in jail. That's not the goal here, right? We want to change behavior, and we all know from a developmental standpoint that kids are really susceptible to making bad decisions until they have their brain developed to a certain point, and then they can make some better decisions. So our goal is to make sure that we do need to enforce laws when they're broken at times, but the goal is to try to figure out how do we get the kid to not do this again in the future. Physical custody, if we do take them into custody, we take them over to SERBU, the kids have to be 12 years of age or older to take them into custody. I've been on this team now this is my second year. I don't know of a time where we've actually put a juvenile in a holding cell, and my team deals with juveniles like 99.9% of their day, so it's pretty rare. I can't speak to patrol because I don't know, but I listen to the radio all day long and I don't hear that happening, so I don't know that those are used very often, and they're there if we need to.
Very uncommon.
But it's pretty uncommon to do. And honestly, even with adults, we don't put a lot of adults in our holding cells either. So they're there for a tool if we need them, but very rarely used. We always work really hard to work with parents and talk to parents about things that are going on with their kids, and then any action that we may take. And if I'm moving off topic from what you guys want, please feel free to jump in and ask about other things that you want to talk about. But I think the goal is to, if a kid's acting out or having issues, the overall goal really is we want to involve parents. We want to find out what the underlying problem may be, and bring them back into the direction they need to go. Handcuffing is super uncommon. Every once in a while it'll happen with some of the older kids. If we are taking them into custody, a lot of times the custodies that we tend to take the most are what we call disorderly conduct cases. So when it's a huge disruption to the school, for example, we have these regularly where kids will, on social media, will post like, don't come to school tomorrow, and they'll post a picture of a gun. And then we'll have 2 to 3, sometimes even more, 100 kids that don't show up to school the next day. I had last year at the end of the year at South Eugene, it was the seniors' last day, and some kid had posted a thread about shooting up the school and had posted a picture of a gun. So we're trying to work through this. I had all the SROs at the school. We're trying to figure out I had one of my SROs up pretty much all night long trying to track this thing down, going from house to house to house. And we weren't able to resolve it by morning, but one of the things that literally broke my heart was this senior kid who, it's the last day of school, they should be super excited, right, and having a great time. It's like, I'm going to graduate. And he walks up to me, he's almost got tears in his eyes, and he goes, am I going to die today? Because my mom made me go to school, but I'm really scared to be here right now. And so we kind of decided that in most cases like that, when it's that impactful to that many people, that we will typically take a kid, if we find out who it is, we'll take them into physical custody and lodge them at Cerboof or something like that. And again, those are usually high school age kids. They're older kids. They're not your middle school or younger kids. But absent that, it's pretty uncommon for us to actually physically take somebody and lodge them over there.
Was there a notice that went out to parents for that?
Yes, that one there was. And I would say anything like that, 99% of the time for something like that, there will be notices that'll go out through the school district to parents.
Because I'm a parent at South. My kid was there last year, and I don't remember receiving
That one
it.
did. I know that one went out for
Okay.
sure. Yeah, for certain.
You said going to house to house to house.
So
Physically, like driving?
yeah, physically. Like I will call one of my team members out at like 2 o'clock in the morning if I get a phone call, and we take those really seriously. So I mean, I don't ever want to be the guy that says in the morning something bad happened. I was like, well, I didn't think it was real. You know, a lot of them we know that they probably aren't going to follow through with, but we're never going to be in that position where we haven't done everything we possibly can to track that down, even if it's 2 o'clock in the morning.
We can't say that. The school shooting started in this area at Thurston.
So I can't say what, I'm sorry.
That it won't happen here.
Exactly, that's what I mean, and I won't.
This is the foundation for that stuff happening.
Absolutely.
And I'm a parent of a child who goes to the school you just mentioned, and it really upsets me.
Yeah.
So.
Which part of it upsets you, I'm sorry?
Well, just the fact that we still deal with that.
Yeah, oh, I know, it upsets me too. Yeah, I feel for you completely, because, and again, just so you guys all know here at the table, that when I get a notification like that, whoever the primary officer is that's responsible for that school, I will call them, and they know they're available 24/7, and they'll suit up and they'll go out. So if I know that this kid posted it and this parent might have called, then we're going to go to every one of these people's houses and get as much information as we can. If it leads us to the next house, we go to the next house, to the next house, to the next house. And sometimes we run into a dead end like we did there. We ended up solving that morning, but I like to try to get it solved that night, so that way nobody's uncomfortable in the morning when they come into school. But we put a lot of effort and a lot of time into making sure that we use every resource we have available. And we recently contracted with a national trainer who is a cybercrimes guy who's just phenomenal. He came into our agency and trained all of our SROs as well as a lot of our detectives. Half of our patrol team and the other half we're going to get trained up here coming up, but on how to investigate those cybercrimes, like doing what we call preservation letters. So if we find out that a kid had posted something, we can go to that social media site, the avenues on how to get in touch with somebody in a timely manner, and then also how to do exigent circumstances, which means that we're concerned about an immediate threat, so we can't wait a week or 2 weeks or whatever, and they have folks in place at these social media places where we can get in contact with them and they can get us the information quicker so that we can follow up on that. So we're constantly working to try to stay in front of that technology piece, because, you know, kids, I don't know about you guys, but when I don't know what's going on with my phone, I hand it to my 14-year-old and he fixes it for me. And then he tells me how dumb I am because I can't figure it out, right? So they're always ahead of us, so we're trying to always trying to figure out ways to make sure we stay in front of that, because that is usually how those come through, is through social media stuff.
Sorry. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just wondering, with only 5 SROs, do they have time to just be in the halls and talk to kids, or is it just like most of the patrol is going from call to call to call to call? Are they more doing call to call to call?
Absolutely are, yeah. I've recently put together a proposal. We're working on trying to get some things together, but I really want to change our program more to proactive versus the reactive stuff. And to do that, we don't have the bodies. I mean, I pulled all our stats, and I don't have them in front of me. I didn't think that would come up, but they are super, super busy. I mean, they're pulling cases constantly and they're investigating constantly. So we as a department are looking at that as far as other options and other ways that we can be, again, that more proactive. I want them to go to the middle schools and hand out cookies at lunch, or, go in and do presentations. Be that person that's walking down the hall to say hi to. They still have that happen a lot. I mean, regularly I'm on the phone with one of my folks, and they'll be like, hey, hang on, so-and-so just came in, and they'll set the phone down. They're like, hey, how's it going? How you been? What's happening? And so people will come in and talk to them. But I want them to have more time to be able to do that stuff, because I think it's just super beneficial for the young ones around. Sorry.
No, I was just wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit, because a lot of things that come to our commission end up because something happened in the news. So what kind of other training, you talked about the forensic interview training, but what other kind of training do you guys, that you specifically, your group, goes after to maybe help you deal with some of the challenges that you have with kids and behaviors and things like that, to where they don't end up in these things that we see on TV?
Sure. So we're kind of, I've been here coming up on year 2 now, and so the first year, kind of the way I like to do things is see how things work, right? And then go, is it working good, or does it need to change? And I think that we need to do some more of that specialized training. Currently, we tend to go to, there's some national conferences, and there's also some state conferences that are designed directly for like school resource officers who are dealing with kids all the time. And we go to those, and those have a lot of good best practice stuff. There's nothing within like our state academy that trains just for SROs. So we've put together recently a group of all of us regionally, SRO supervisors, district folks, school safety officers, those kind of folks, and we've been talking about a curriculum to put forward a curriculum that would just be literally school specific, and how we would look at that. Talk to Eric Gablitz, who is the head of DPSST, and he seems like that's something that he'd be interested in looking at. So we're kind of working on how that would look and what that would look like, and then it's just a matter of choosing good people. I have a great team of folks that really have a passion for kids, and so when you have that passion, that kind of comes through. So and knowing all your community resources too, and what you have available to you, and who you can refer folks to help out in different areas like that. So, hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Myself on the queue next. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your team, if there was somebody who spoke Spanish, or what sort of strengths they bring to it.
Sure. No, I don't have anybody on the team currently who's bilingual. Strengths, I mean, it's kind of like anything. When you have a group of folks, you get to figure out as a supervisor, the kind of the fun thing for me is I get to figure out who's strong here, who's strong there, and so when things come up, I can pick that person for it. And so that's always something I've always thought was important. I always did that on patrol too. It's like, here's my tactical guy over here. Okay, yeah, I'm the supervisor, I make the final decision, but I want to go to you and hear what you have to say, because you're the person who's going to know probably more about this situation than me. So I'm fortunate in the fact that I have folks they have all different types of sets of skills like that, and some that are, all of them are great with kids, which is great. But you just use those resources and decide, who it is that you put in their ear a little bit if you need some help or some information.
Jennifer?
Yeah, so I had some questions. You were talking about the interview process that you do with kids. So it sounds like there's not a huge legal obligation to make sure there's a parent there, and that's for the informal.
Correct.
Okay, so are the informal, can those interviews be used later for, like if the kid said something that incriminated himself or herself or made the situation, like I'm wondering how important are these interviews?
Good question. So I'm going to try to answer your question this way. If it doesn't work, let me know, okay? So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll even have kids that are going to potentially be getting in trouble for something. They're like, no, I just want to talk to you. We're literally like, no, don't talk to us. We want you to have this person here with you. Your mom wants to be here, your dad wants to be here. So we're not going to discuss anything. If they start talking, we'll sometimes just walk out of the room and watch them through the window. So if there's ever a point in time where a kid says something that we think, oh gosh, this is changing the direction we thought it was going to go, and I think that's what you're just talking about, then we stop it. And it's like, hold up, stop. Let's regroup and go out and talk about this and say, call a parent and let them know what's going on. Let them have that opportunity.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm very happy to hear that. Because I was really concerned with the 20, 30 minutes. I mean, if you're a stay-at-home parent,
Sure.
or you have a job where you're allowed to have your phone with you,
Right.
that's easy. 20, 30 minutes
Right.
is no big deal. But if you're in a job where you're not, where there's an expectation that you're not taking personal calls,
Sure. So to
you're
help
just
you,
never going to get back to them.
to help you a little bit with that, the district has, like, literally, when people enroll their kids, they've got work numbers, they've got
Yeah.
home numbers, they've got grandparent numbers, they've got so many different numbers,
Right,
and they'll
right.
try all of those numbers.
Mhm.
And again, if we get a hold of somebody and they say, I can't make it in 20 minutes, but I can be there in 40 minutes, fine, we'll wait. I mean, we don't push that. I will back up a little bit though, because I didn't cover this piece, it is in the policy, but where that doesn't come into play is if we have an immediate threat. So like if we have a situation where we're told a kid has a gun, or there's a bomb in the school, or there's somebody who is in immediate danger, life or safety danger, then we're not going to wait that 20, 30 minutes. We're going to get, what we typically would do is we get that part of information that we need to have to be able to resolve whatever we think might be a danger to somebody. Then we'll stop,
Okay.
and not go further into it or do our entire investigation and bring a parent in. But that'd be the only time where we wouldn't offer that as an opportunity.
That sounds reasonable. Thank you. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And then I have Lindsay.
Hey, how's it
How are
going?
you?
Good.
Good.
I was wondering, so you mentioned if there's times when there's no citation, no obvious crime, no arrest that's likely to be made. So I'm sort of curious, like, why are police the right tool for the job in those circumstances? And are there situations where if the school district had more staff or differently trained staff, police officers wouldn't be thrown into those situations?
So, I mean, it's all about, every organization decides what they want to do, right? And what their policies are, and what they think their liabilities are, what they think they should be doing as a job. The districts have made the decision, and I mean, there's a lot of case law too, if you wanted to go back and look at all that stuff, that they're not going to put hands on kids unless, like, there's an immediate danger, like they're jumping out in front of a car, or they're physically fighting, they'll separate them, that kind of a piece. So what it really comes down into is who else is going to do it when, these two 8-year-olds run off, and obviously we don't want 8-year-olds running around the neighborhood. So it kind of, I equate it sometimes to the whole mental health piece. It's like, we don't know what to do, so call the police. So we get called. And is it the best use of resource? No, but who else is going to do it? And we don't want these kids running out in the neighborhood and getting themselves hurt because they're not making good decisions. So hopefully, does that answer your question, Elizabeth?
It does. That's sort of one circumstance. Are there other circumstances where no one's like at large?
Sure.
And you're in a school building and you're with students dealing with some kind of, I'm assuming, problem behavior, but that you're indicating doesn't rise to the level of a crime or citation. They haven't violated any laws. Are there situations where you're not going to bring small children back to the school from which they've ran, where you're involved?
So we do a really good job of separating that administrative piece versus the law enforcement piece, and it's really clear in our MOU, and the whole team is really understands the difference between the two. So if it's school discipline type stuff, we are not involved in that. I mean, that is not our piece. We don't want to be, and we don't want to have any part in that. We want to have a very separate delineation as our roles and their roles. Now, that example I gave you earlier, that's where it kind of goes outside of it, but it's still a safety issue, right?
Sure.
And we're here for those safety issues. So we're not a part of that. So if there's a discipline issue that doesn't rise to the level of crime, that would not be something we've been involved in.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep, of course.
To add just a little bit to that, some areas where a parent may not be called, where we are interacting with a student.
Oh, thank you.
And I think that's kind of the piece that we haven't quite touched on, and that could be a witness, info gathering, where you are talking about a crime, we're trying to figure out what's going on. But every kid that we pull in, I was an SRO for 3.5 years. So every kid that we interview, we're not going to wait for every parent as we're trying to figure out and track and roll the stone. But once we get down to where there is that, once we have that core and we know who our really involved people are, that's when we would start calling parents and whatnot. But there's lots. I mean, the SROs have hundreds of contacts every day with kids.
Sure.
And it's a unique balance, and yet it doesn't take very long to kind of figure out where that is, where those pieces work together. The SRO has also become really an embedded part of the admin team at their school. I was heavily involved in just being another resource for the school in general, and so it's a really unique and pretty cool role. So
Another piece I touched on, I give you another example of a reason why we wouldn't contact parents is if we suspect like child abuse stuff.
Sure.
So we aren't going to call.
And that was
parents on
super clear in the policy.
Okay,
that it
yeah.
delineates
Yeah,
that really
I
well.
didn't mention that one as
Well done.
as we would, so I want to make sure I got that on the table. So.
I have myself next, and I was going to ask about those more sensitive cases of child abuse or parents that may or may not be the problem in the situation, and how you sort of take it beyond the bounds of a school building.
I'm not sure if I completely understand what you're asking.
So I was just hoping you would talk more about those cases and what you do in that circumstance, your relationship with Child Protective Services and how that all goes down.
Sure. We work really closely with DHS, so usually, I mean, everything that we do, any report that because I approve all the reports, so at a bare minimum, everything gets cross-referenced. So any report that one of my folks write, if it involves a youth, then I always have it routed to DHS. Now, like regularly, today, even yesterday, like even the day before, we'll have these situations where we've got potentially some sort of abuse or something like that. So the SRO will typically contact DHS and work with DHS on what's the safety plan, what's the best place for this kid to be, try to work through, how something might have happened. For example, they'll regularly go out to the house with DHS and go talk to the parents, go inside the house, check the house out, make sure that they have all the things they need to have. So yeah, it's definitely a relationship. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Questions or concerns we want to talk about? I have a few tiny questions, like what's the difference between a status and non-offender juvenile in 324.2?
Yeah. So I had to look that one up in May when we did this review too, and there was some talk about whether or not to put it out as a definition or not, and we didn't at that time. But I did make some notes here just so that I could be totally clear, because I knew that question was going to come up. So status offenders are kids where their offense is only due to the nature of them being a juvenile. So curfew violations, skipping school, truancy, runaways, etc. And then non-offender juveniles are juveniles that are responsible to the court, but it's non-criminal. So if they're abuse victims where they're in the custody of the courts, or they have substance abuse issues and so they're mandated to do treatments or other things where there's not a criminal component to it, but they are responsible to the courts, or the courts are responsible for them. And those are terms that we do not readily use within the Eugene Police Department.
I'm glad you knew the answer to that question.
When I was reviewing this today, I was like, oh, I remember talking about it and looking at it, and I pulled out the old Google and made myself some notes, because we
I know the differentiation between the two, but I don't know the definition, so.
Yeah. So for that, as we launch into the policy, I kind of chewed over what to do, because I don't have particular areas to point out that were things that we were wanting to change. So rather than having us all talk,
Wow. Ding dong.
calling out the different,
No, I didn't.
the different sections for 10 pages, I kind of figured I would just open it up, and I'm guessing most people have read it and see what questions there might be, and then I'll have Ryan answer them for you.
Perfect. And did we review this when you updated it or not?
Honestly, I don't recall, and I don't think so, because again, they were legally required, and we weren't doing a full policy review. So they were, I don't remember his last name, but it's Ryan from the state who would send us a few things that needed to be adjusted, and so we made those adjustments. And different Ryan. And so we made those adjustments. My recollection, and I don't remember. My recollection is thinking that you had looked at it at that time. That we looked to see if there was anything major to do. But honestly, I don't remember exactly. The Police Commission did not review it, but it wasn't purely an amendment. We glossed over it to make sure there wasn't any other glaring issues, and put a new review date on it. So that's where we landed.
I have Lindsay on the queue.
So in 324.6.4, It's the most fun section in the policy. No, it's the most terrible
yes.
section of the policy. Death of a juvenile while detained. Says in the event of a juvenile's death while being detained at this department, the district attorney's office, and it goes on. But I was curious, does it mean literally like physically like at this department, or does it mean by this department? Like if someone's detained, if a juvenile's detained by the department, is that section of the policy referring only to when people are within like EPD's holding cells, or is it like
Yeah,
ever?
because the general tone of this policy is so, there's a lot of it that's specific to our holding facilities.
Yep.
I would interpret that, having not specifically written it, I would interpret that to be if we have a juvenile custody detained here,
Okay.
those are the specific contacts.
Okay. So if that were to happen
Because they're in a
while they're detained in a school or somewhere else that's a more publicly visible environment, for example, like your holding cells are not publicly visible, right?
Correct.
So it's a kind of special situation that there's a specific.
Yeah, that's a unique scenario, and certainly requires a different kind of investigation and level of review.
Okay.
Whereas a juvenile that died that happened to be in our handcuffs or was
Right.
in our presence in
Right.
the public
Right.
is different than a juvenile who's been locked away in a cell.
Yep.
And there's more, did we follow our inspection protocols? Was the room inspected before they got in there? I mean,
Sure.
there's so much, it's
And all
just
the
a
other
whole
things that you're-
different beast when you go, because it's essentially, we have a mini corrections unit
Right.
downstairs. And so you have a corrections piece as opposed to a patrol in custody death. So there's a little bit of a difference there.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
I had one as well about 324.3.1B. I cannot imagine that.
Well, hang on. 324.3
Dot one.
B.
The one about snacks.
One snack upon request.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I cannot imagine that you were questioning kids about how long it's been since they ate, so you can deny them a snack. So.
Anytime we put somebody in a holding cell downstairs, we're having those kinds of discussions with them. 99% of the time. And a lot of that, I mean, part of it is just, it's building rapport with the person, because you probably have been with them for a while, you're gonna be with them for a while. And so building a smoother relationship to reduce the potential for any sort of conflict. So we oftentimes, even our adult custodies, we'll go grab McDonald's for them and bring it back and let them eat. So.
I was just wondering about that.
If a kid's asking for food because they're hungry.
And they're always
someone I know.
It's likely that regardless of how long it's been, we're probably
Yeah,
gonna get
exactly.
it.
I was going to say, from someone I know likes to get things as short as possible, it just seems like a lot of unnecessary words involved.
Yeah, and I don't know if that one is specifically an ORS related. It very likely could be. Is it? Because most of these, it lists the ORS, and that one, it doesn't have the specific reference to it. This whole policy is lathered with the legal requirements, and so while there's lots of policies that I like to take the axe to, as we all have found, this is one I don't want to touch. I'll make tweaks and adjustments and change, but I'm not going to remove a word if I don't have to, because tracking down where that word came from is complicated. Any other thoughts, comments, concerns, questions about the policy?
If the kids are freezing, do you get them a blanket?
Pretty sure they get a blanket. There should be a blanket down there. Each of the cells will have a blanket. Perfect.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. Thank you so much for coming by. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yep. Have a good evening.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks, Ryan.
So we are a little bit ahead of schedule, which is excellent because this discussion deserves more time than we were able to give it. I'd love to invite Lorna Flormo, is that how? Flormo, yeah. Flormo, down to begin our diversity, equity, and inclusion discussions with some best practices and values. Since we have a few extra minutes, do you want to tell everybody, what you do?
Yeah, of course. That's kind of part of it too, but I can do that in
Just really quick, I didn't notice in the meeting minutes, it says Juan Carlos Valle, but the name is misspelled, so. Yeah, I'll get that back to you, the correct spelling, but I didn't understand what it was, so, that definitely needed to be looked at. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Sorry.
So my name's Lorna Flormo. I know a few of you. And I work for the City of Eugene in the City Manager's Office, specifically in the Office of Human Rights and Neighborhood Involvement. And golly, I do a lot of public participation outreach work with our more marginalized communities, something I'm going to talk to you about today. Also, I'm working on some new training components for the city organization around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Also do community education and workshops as well. I lead our language access initiative. We kind of do a lot of different things, but those are some of the main pieces that I'm in charge of. So, anybody have any questions about my role in the city, or? No? Okay. Great. So Jeremy asked me to come talk. I think it's great that you all are trying to have more discussions around diversity, equity, inclusion, and what that means for a city council, or for a city commission, excuse me, although there are a few councilors here. So I actually have given this presentation to a couple, the Planning Commission and to the Sustainability Commission as well. I didn't have as much time as I would have liked to kind of get examples and pictures that apply to the Police Commission, although they do have some examples in there, but some of the pictures are not. I'll have to pop some of those in there for at a later time. So it's going to be really brief, and it's really around the values and principles of doing inclusive public participation. It's part of a larger document that the city has that you can find online, and I'd be happy to send a link to Jeremy with that in it or something in the future if you want more information, or if you want any more information on this. I also do a more involved 3-hour workshop on kind of a hands-on workshop for staff on if they're looking at the onset of a public participation process, or if they're in the middle of it and feel stuck and they're kind of not getting responses and information from who they want, or looking at it evaluatively and looking back on it. So that's something that I offer for staff for actually hands-on projects. Let's see. Also, I'm really informal, so if you have a question as we're going along, please raise your hand. I'm going to try to kind of get through this, and then we can have some time to just discuss, and you could ask, and we can kind of brainstorm about the work you're doing and how this might apply. So feel free to just kind of, if you have something in between, just stop me. So really, in a nutshell, the public participation guidelines are a guide to how we govern as an institution. How we involve the public in identifying priorities and solutions so we can better understand the community's concerns and how they can be reflected in our city policies, practices, and programs. And really to work towards an equitable application and provision for all community members, right? Because for example, we have meetings, and who can come to a 7 o'clock meeting on a Saturday night that's in a certain location? And so those are things that we need to think about in terms of who can participate. And it's only in English, and it's very formal, and things like that can be barriers for folks to participate. So this will give you just kind of a little, this is actually what the document looks like on the front. We're going to do an overhaul to it soon as we get a little bit more room on our plates. But it was originally created in partnership with the University of Oregon. And we did a lot of interviews and focus groups. I was actually a graduate student at the time, and it was involved in gathering some of that information. And it was refined and tested. It's a living document. We consider it because our community is always changing, and best practices and things that we didn't say that it's never going to change, and the stamps on it. So we're still working on that. In fact, some of the visuals you'll see in this are updated framing for the the document. It's really grounded in the city's vision around diversity and equity, that we want diverse participation in public input so that we are serving everyone. And just kind of to ground us in that, as a municipal government, it's good for us all to recognize that our power and privilege and the influence our actions have on our community. So some communities and groups of people can get left out of those processes for the reason, that generally the reasons we'll get more in detail that I just talked about, the time of the meeting, where it's located, who's attending, the topic, people need childcare, work swing shift, all those kinds of things. So when we depend solely on those traditional types of public participation, we don't hear from everyone. Therefore, our policies and our plans and our services serve only the people that we're hearing from. Not to say there's not overlap sometimes, because there is, but. So it's our responsibility as public servants or folks volunteering in public service to make sure that we have equitable outcomes in decision-making and policies in our service delivery. So the values and principles we're going to talk about tonight are really kind of the umbrella or the foundation, if you like to, however you like to visualize that, for doing this. So it's just kind of an overview. And also just want to mention that they're really nonlinear and iterative. Many of the values, you'll see how they connect to each other. There's no recipe or checked boxes. It's very dynamic and organic in the way that things play out. And that can be challenging at times. Part of that challenge is that depending on the communities you're trying to reach, or a specific community you're trying to reach, or the context of a project or service or program, you need to kind of think about these principles and apply them to that community and to that context of whatever project or service you're talking about. And then also, we always need to be really willing to challenge our assumptions. We have a lot of experience with government, everybody around the table here, and are coming from a certain perspective. Not everyone comes from that perspective, so it's really important for us to kind of try to step out of our own experience. So we're going to go through the 6 values and talk about culturally responsive principles that the values are grounded in. I'll give some brief examples to help illustrate the importance and how they're non-linear and iterative in nature. Some of the examples will be how it didn't work well or when it doesn't work well, and some will be when it has worked well and how that improved our process and made the project more successful. So I'm imagining many of you have seen this before. Is there anybody who hasn't? Okay. This kind of begs the question of, if we treat everyone the same, what happens? So in government, we serve everyone, but can everyone gain access to government in the same way? Who has advantages, and do those advantages give them more power or influence in the government? Like, for example, you equally, let's make everything equal. Everybody gets the same size box. But what happens? Somebody is left out. Now, if someone needs a little something more to be able to have a similar outcome, to be able to watch the game in this instance, that's the difference between equality and equity. Not giving the same thing, but giving what's needed for people to have the same outcome. This is just a remove the barriers and create more access. This is just another, that last image has gotten a little bit of scrutiny. I think it's still a good image, but so here's another image that kind of gets at the same thing. Some community members might need something different to gain access. In this instance, to be able to go on a bike ride. What do you think are some examples? I'm going to ask some questions too, because it helps me give context to your work. But what do you think are some examples in police commission work or police work where this happens?
Public notifications, not in Spanish.
Perfect example. Yeah, language barriers. Thank you.
I think a lot has to do with when we try to get people to come speak at our meetings and tell us what's going on, the access to getting to wherever the location is here, or the time of night, or because we do have limited public transportation in the evening, and so that does play a part in it. So I think, yeah.
Transportation and work or childcare, things like that. Yeah, so those are great examples of this. So one thing that I like to use an example, because when I presented to the Planning Commission, this came up. We were talking about public comment time, and I think this could apply to any commission. So one of the commissioners said, well, we have the 3-minute rule because then that's equal for everyone. And we kind of talked about that a little bit more and got to the point where we were talking about, what would happen if you had a group of, say, a group that you never hear from that came. And in their instance, they said, we had this group of renters from this specific, they were all from this same rental area, and they had a lot to, we've never seen renters come here before, and they had a really important thing to say, and then, we had 3 minutes, we gave them 3 minutes. And another example came up in the same instance with the Human Rights Commission. I was at that meeting. They were talking about Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day, and they've never had a large contingency of Native Americans show up at their meetings. And that night, they had a lot of folks, which was really amazing. So to get at the equity in both cases, maybe shifting that 3-minute rule and saying, wow, we haven't heard from this group. They haven't really had access. They've made a point to be here because something's really important tonight. So thinking about, what are those circumstances under which you might shift to get at equity and say, okay, for the same outcome, we have people that show up every time and make public comments, but we've never seen these folks before. They've got something really important to say. So how might we do things a little differently? So those are some examples that I think apply to commissions really well. So what does this mean for our public participation practices? So just in general, inclusive public participation is grounded in principles of cultural responsiveness, which you'll see on the purple, and we'll get at what those are in just a minute. And then there are really 6 mutually reinforcing values. These are nonlinear, again, as I mentioned. It's not a 1, 2, 3 process, which we tried to describe by having this visual. There's not a clear start or finish or order. You can pick up in multiple places, and they really build on each other. So before we talk about the values, the pieces of the pie here, we'll look at the crust, or what it's, I don't know why I'm using a pie. I never thought that before. I'm like, oh, it's the crust. It's kind of where it's all in. So I know, right?
That's the best part. Yes.
So these came directly from the outreach we did to many folks out in the community that belonged to communities that often get left out in our public processes. So in general, I just want to make sure when we think about culture that we're thinking about it in a broad sense. The Webster's dictionary definition is the beliefs and customs of a particular society, group, place, way of life, way of thinking and behaving. But we know, I want us to think in the broadest sense that, we know there's a Latino culture or a Jewish culture, but there's also a youth culture and a senior culture. Families have cultures. A culture may exist when families or people are living in poverty or on low incomes. There's a culture of homeowners. There's a culture of folks who don't own homes. There's a culture of folks who don't have homes at all. And even within that, there's subcultures. There's a culture in your neighborhood or within smaller geographies. You hear people talk about police culture. So just, you get what I'm saying, but we're talking about a broad sense. And we want to be able to be responsive to as many of these cultures as possible when we're doing engagement, not just our sort of dominant culture in Eugene. Do you have any sense of what I mean by that when I say Eugene's dominant culture? What do you think that?
Well, it's the dominant culture on the commission.
Yeah, I will put my neck out.
Sure.
White, somewhere between middle to high income, maybe college students, depending, if you're in the West Eugene neighborhood.
Yeah, I think that you hit a lot of, I mean, when we're talking about folks who, especially that come to our public processes and we're talking about more educated, middle class, white, like you said, homeowners oftentimes, especially when dealing with things like Neighborhood Leaders Council and things like that. Like me, like many of us here around the table. So that's why it's really important for us to be aware of these differences in the culture. So just briefly, I'm going to go over each one of these if anybody has anything to add or ask. So the first one about people don't want to be studied. If a group is different than me and I'm not part of that culture, I want to approach them with sincere curiosity and not a desire to get data or numbers necessarily from them. If you can think of it more as not a transactional transaction, but of a relationship. For example, and I'm going to have to read this, but it can be as simple as the words you use. For example, we want you to take this survey so that we know what the Latino community thinks. Versus, we're talking to people in Eugene about police services and would like to include your opinion and ideas. Would you be willing to share them with us? So it can be subtle, but it's kind of the way you frame it. More relational instead of academic or study-based. And then the next one is just recognizing diversity within various communities. That we all know this, right? When we say youth, not all youth are the same and need the same thing. There's lots of different subgroups. Renters are not all the same. A lot of folks will say our Latino community. I make a point to say our Latino communities because within that there's so much diversity. There's people from different cultures. There's even different languages. There's there may be similarities, but there's different races. Our LGBTQ plus community, extremely diverse. So while there may be some similarities, it's important to remember that not everyone is the same from those groups. Which feeds into the next, learning about the communities that you want to engage. Again, really important to challenge our own biases, what information that we already have that's kind of cached in our brains about that community, and be able to, that may be based on really limited experience. So being able to kind of acknowledge that. And then really take the time to learn about that community's history, the issues that that community faces, the politics of that community, and develop a two-way communication. So you're starting to develop trust with that community. And just, again, really challenge our assumptions. You'll hear me say that lots, because I think it's really important for us to realize that we're coming at things from our perspective or our truth, and that's not the same for everyone. And this was an example for the Planning Commission more, but like, does a renter have less financial investment in a neighborhood than a homeowner? Many homeowners will say that's true. But when you talk to renters, it's not true to them, to many of them. Or in this instance, what kind of relationship or experience does that particular community have with police? It may be really different than my experience. So the next one is just really emphasizing the power of stories. It's a really accessible way that folks can participate and share information, and I think it's kind of the heart and the meat of what is important to people if we listen to their stories. Many folks, including myself, don't always know the ins and outs of all the bureaucratic processes that we are involved in, and maybe aren't that familiar with things like even Robert's Rules of Order or the 3 minutes time to speak and things like that. So it's our job to cut through that for people and develop strategies to help do that let people use their lived experiences to help articulate what their needs are. Networks, the importance of using established community networks, going to where people already gather in a place that they already trust, around people that they already trust. I can't emphasize this enough. It really makes a huge difference. And we also don't have to recreate the wheel. I help advise a lot of different staff groups, and they'll say, well, why aren't they coming? We have this, they must not care. Why aren't they coming? Or how can we get them to come? And it's like, no, don't flip that on its head. Go to where folks are. Don't try. You're just going to be pulling your hair out trying to get folks to come. So I kind of, have a table metaphor to that. It's like, instead of inviting people to your table, see if you can get an invitation to their table, where they're comfortable and they feel at home. So the last one on here, actually it's not the last one, the second to the last one is spend time building relationships. This is another extremely important one. And I would add to it that that it be continuous, and that you really invest in the front end and be patient and be present, and that it's a reciprocal relationship. It's not, I'm coming to you because I need something from you, but it's like, I'm coming to you because I want to get to know who you are and what are the issues that you deal with, and how can I learn from those issues and create better policy and government. And that is really the foundation, I'm sure, all of the officers here that really understand that one. And that if you can keep an ongoing relationship with someone or a group, that you're going to have a much better outcome when you do need something, instead of just coming to folks when you need something. So many pieces revolve around trust and inclusive participation and trust and social capital, and building bridges that way. And it really links to a lot of the other pieces around networks and relationships, and then the diversity within groups as well. And then kind of linked with that, I wanted to just mention that sometimes we say, oh, we need this kind of person on our board or our group, and it kind of starts to feel a little like tokenism, and that can be really not representative, and also puts a really heavy burden on that one person, because they're just one person. And when we talked about the diversity within groups, that's a lot for them to shoulder. So just keeping in mind that that if you have one person of color on a board, or one person from LGBTQ+ community, that don't put too much on them to carry that weight.
Can I add?
Yeah.
That is one of the hardest things.
Yes, it is.
Because, and not only on this commission, but other things I'm involved in, trying to get other voices at the table without saying, well, we need this person from this particular group. How do you do that? I mean, how do you then be able to go out and say, we need to not look like we do, we need to look like something else, without specifically saying I need to?
Yeah, well, a couple things I can say is we've started to try to advise groups from our office anyway, to kind of think about the power of 3. If you can get 3 members that are from more marginalized communities on your boards, that it helps lift some of the weight. They may not, and it diversifies the opinion, and also can help them to feel more comfortable speaking up on certain issues, because they have some reinforcement from the group. It's not just 1 in 10 or something like that. But and then the other thing I think is just trying to really think of those folks more as not as the voice, but as a connection back to community. And if they can be connecting with their communities and actually bringing that information back more broadly, instead of having to just, from their perspective, because, they might have a really different perspective than some other folks in their same community. Like I said, it speaks back to that diversity in those communities. Does that?
It helps.
It is a hard one.
It is. And I think also too, we have to look outside of what our kind of, get back to your assumptions of just what other cultures or what other people and certain assumptions that we have. And an example of that is that I sit on a nonprofit board where we were trying to do this. Well, we happened to come across a person that is from generational poverty, and she actually speaks about it. And we were lucky enough to have her join our board to bring a whole different perspective that we had never even thought how that would affect, because most of our group that we work with comes from poverty. And so it's now really, because it's really different, especially when you have somebody that's been in like 4 generations of poverty.
I think as you're speaking, I was thinking too, it's important to remember that, you know, you have a group of 10 or 15 people, and that's not like just getting someone on your board that might have a different perspective is not the substitute for doing inclusive public participation, like getting input from a broader group of people. So that's also like sometimes we go, oh, okay, we have our people, and now we know.
Yeah, you don't really know.
Yeah, right. So just kind of remembering that it's because it's such a big burden on those folks too if you try to put too much on their shoulders.
I have a question from Silver as well.
Yeah. So it's really difficult when somebody says, well, speak to me about the Latino community.
Yeah.
Tell me about the Latino thought on this. And I'm never going to ask you to speak to the white community.
Yeah. It's a good analogy though, right?
But I mean, it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
You know, what do soccer moms think? You know, tell me, what do bankers think about this situation? So, yeah, it is a heavy burden, but it is, if you're just open to the fact that you have somebody who has a different opinion or a different thought, hopefully they share their input on the, during the the conversation pieces, then that's important. But no one person can speak to a community, so.
I like that analogy too. Like if somebody were to come to me and say, oh, what do white women think about? I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know, you know, like I can say what I think, but you know, so.
Lorna, I had something real quick.
Sorry. Yeah.
So in my day job, I deal with a lot of trying to get people to think about things differently from a different cultural perspective than their own. And one of the things that I think, maybe you mentioned it and I didn't hear it, that we run up against constantly is their instinct to get defensive, to immediately start to justify their first opinion. When we just want them to listen. We don't need them to justify what they said before. We don't care about that as much as changing their minds. And maybe if we can get people to encourage them to, if you have that initial reaction, to start getting defensive and to start making excuses, they don't. Just put that aside and just, because it takes your focus off listening to the other person and to their perspective, because you're formulating in your head, how do I justify what I just said, or how do I excuse what I just said, or my misunderstanding, instead of just taking the time to listen.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, active listening, right? But also, if we can, well, a couple things to that. Oftentimes when we are working more closely on a policy or a project or whatever, we kind of sometimes can have this like preconceived outcome of like, this is where we want to get. And so we really have to kind of let go of that and not have, because I think that's where we can get, you know, that kind of thing, and try to convince someone of the way we think about it. And then the simple thing that I often do, and I think this applies in a lot of different situations, but is that if people are to try to come from a place of curiosity instead of defensiveness, when you're hearing something that's different than your own, just be curious. Maybe ask them a question about why they think that and learn more, instead of like, well, wait, this is how I want it, you know, this is how it's gonna go, or why wouldn't we do it this way? And ultimately, you just learn more about, I mean, this is public, we are talking about public services and stuff, so we want to be able to get as many different perspectives as possible, and then come up with a solution that can serve the most people.
So do you start out a process by talking about that, about being curious, and like, I wonder how you fight against that. I would love advice on how you fight against that.
I can, I can kind of try to go through, I mean, we can stop and talk, or we can go through it's hard, because this is such a big topic, and you know,
I'll catch up with you later.
But I'm happy to talk to anybody individually, and I also just want to remind folks that, again, back to that community and context specific, it really depends on like what you're talking about, and who you're trying to engage, and how, and with that context and community perspective, then you can start to say like, well, I think this might work, or I think that might work, or you might need to do some framing up front, or come up with some ground rules, or it just kind of depends. Yeah, it's hard to say something broad, besides these and the next ones I'm gonna say, otherwise you really need to get into the details more. The last one is just demonstrate results, right? Nobody likes to spend time sharing information, especially if they're already a little nervous to interact with government for any reason or are not as familiar with it. So make sure and let people know how their participation was used, how it fed back into the process, how their investment impacted things, right? We always want to know that. I'm sure every one of us around this table would agree with that. So back to our pie. So now I'm just going to talk briefly about the 6 pieces of the pie. And again, they're not linear, so I have to do a PowerPoint to start with one. So I'll be starting with some, but they really, you can pick up in multiple places and they can build on each other. And of course, I'm just going to start with planning, careful planning and preparation, because ideally we'd all love to start any project or process by planning and being prepared. I really think that an important thing is to be really deliberate and intentional around planning and preparation, and definitely plan with input from some of the communities you want to involve. Don't create something without that, because then it might not work. So ask them what they think, how it would be best, where would be the best place to go. Do we need incentives for participation? There's all sorts of questions, but if you involve some of the folks from those communities, you're going to get a better insight and have a better process. And you're building those relationships. Here's that crisscross pieces of all these. And I'm going to just limit to some of the more police-based examples that I have, because we do work with the police department quite a bit and the auditor's office. So I'll leave out the other ones so we have more time for discussion. But an example of this was the police chief hiring process. Our office was very involved in that. We did a broad survey to all of the community, what are you looking for? I'm sure you all were involved in it too. So, and then we went this is the part probably where our office was a little more involved. We went out to marginalized communities and groups and asked them about their values and what they would be looking for in a chief of police. And we used those to help form the job description and also create the supplemental questions, and in terms of scoring the supplemental questions, they were used. So there we involved folks in the planning process. So yeah, that's just a good example I was thinking of that's actually a little more recent even than my old example. So the next value that I'm going to talk about briefly is inclusion and demographic diversity. I want to highlight in the first bullet the word potential or potentially. So a lot of times we start to define who are the stakeholders with this policy, issue, problem, whatever. And again, because of who we are, we can leave out some potential stakeholders. So we can start somewhere, but definitely challenge your assumptions about who is a stakeholder and leave the process open so that when other stakeholders are identified, you can add them into the process and make sure their voices come in as well. So just keep that open and let it evolve. An example, she left. Beatrice Fernandez from the police auditor's office. So one example of inclusion and demographic diversity and who we engage in processes. I know there's been a lot of general public processes around public safety, especially kind of recently with trying to get more funding and things like that. But in the last year and a half, it initially started with the auditor's office, but we've been doing a public safety forum in Spanish. I think you may have been.
Yeah, I went to
Yeah.
the 2 years ago.
Yeah, the first one. So we've done 2 more, and the last one was at Cesar Chavez School, and we had over 200 participants. We ran out of food, and it was really amazing. And the chief has been present at both the last 2. But it was in a school, in a trusted place. We do it instead of translating into Spanish. It's all in Spanish, and those who need English can put on the earphones and listen. We hired Alex Reyna, who's a local community person, very connected, and does a lot of does like a Facebook radio show to be the MC. A lot of people connect with him and trust him. We do a lot of work. Beatrice and I go out and talk to different groups and hand out information and let people know what it's like. We did a lot of like trying to make sure that we only have officers in plain clothes because some folks are don't feel comfortable with the uniform, and at the same time trying to break that down to like actually get community to be able to talk to Eugene police officers and meet their chief and be able to ask questions really clear. And we do anonymous questions too, so people can ask. And it's not just about police; it's also the county victim services, and we had someone from CAUSA, that is an immigrant advocacy organization, and answering questions about things like driver's licenses and how's that going to come out. So, and a immigration attorney, and we actually had a ton of like tables from all sorts of different community organizations. So that's a way that that community in particular has fear around police in general. And so that's a way that we can do something specifically for them to start to help break down that fear and have some more discussions, and that's been really successful. So yeah, that's a good example of that one there. And collaboration and shared purpose is another piece of the pie. Something I think as public servants that we look for, the common good once we get a lot of voices there instead of versus the loudest or most powerful voices in the room. And sometimes we have to compromise. This is, Jennifer, where the curiosity versus defensiveness, I think, comes in. It can be really difficult, but having things like ground rules and good facilitation can really help. Also, think this kind of goes into that, planning and shared. If you're planning together with groups that you're trying to reach, it's easier to collaborate and have a shared purpose. And I think it's really important too that we ask people, when we ask people to do things for us or participate in a process, say someone from Centro or the NAACP, or that we really think about. We don't often compensate them for their participation or for their time in getting folks from their communities to be involved. So I would really highly recommend thinking about that. How either coming up with something that's mutually beneficial. What are our common goals here, or what is the incentive for folks to participate? And some folks will participate just because they want to, but generally speaking, that is more of a, like us that are around the table here, that dominant culture. So some of the things that we've done in the past have been having incentives like grocery cards or things like that, or more recently with the update of the, I always forget the exact name of this, the climate plan, sorry, can you?
Climate action plan.
Climate action plan, thank you.
No problem.
We actually created an equity panel to help advise on that, and there were representatives from different nonprofit communities of color, and we actually paid a stipend to those people to participate in that. So it's important to think about that. And it's always good to acknowledge competing needs and emphasize the common good. Encourage that openness and listening, and it doesn't mean that we have to make sure everyone agrees. It's just for us to hold that space to have the different perspectives there. So another EPD example of that, which gets us into the next piece, is really Chief Skinner taking right off the bat when he came on board, we helped him set up meetings with communities of color right away, and he was wanting to go to them, go to where they were, and start to build an ongoing relationship with them, and to talk about how we can work together, what their common goals are, and a really new thing that the police department is doing, which is great, with our office, is having a hate and bias community liaison for different communities. So we not only have someone from our office, but we have someone in the police department that if something happens a hate crime happens in a particular community person, we have someone from UPD and someone from our office who can really attend to that and get into the details. Which kind of, yeah.
For clarity, that's somebody from each of these, or an EPD resource from each of these communities, or assigned to each, or is it all one person?
No, it's multiple people from EPD. They're not necessarily representative of the community, but they are a point person, say, for the Latino community, or I work with, I'm probably going to get the name, Sergeant Burroughs? Sergeant?
Dave Burroughs, yes.
Dave Burroughs, okay, yeah. So he and I are kind of the point people for our Latino communities from the two departments. So, so to me, that really gets to this next piece, which is really around transparency and trust. Can't emphasize this enough. It's so important. And kind of going back to the hate crimes example, I mean, we have a rights assistance program in our office that folks can utilize whether they're reporting hate crimes or non-criminal incidents, or they are experiencing civil rights violations. And we can really help them with, like, what is the process, and help them with the navigation. If they initially feel uncomfortable going to police directly, we can kind of be that buffer and help them, and then bring in the right people so that they can have a good experience. And that transparency, it's an interesting thing, and this is the place where I think sometimes it can go sideways in terms of a perception of not being transparent can happen unintentionally. I've seen different processes where, you know, I'm sure you're all familiar with how slow things can go with the city sometimes in different processes. So sometimes even just the void of not getting any information in different times in our office has created where we had a homelessness work group, and then around the chief hiring process too, where people said they got worried that we weren't being transparent. Something's happening, why isn't this, and it really made us kind of step back and go, okay, at first it had this knee-jerk reaction to be defensive and say, well, no, nothing's happened, you're just, but then it was like, no, what can we do? We just need to acknowledge that we just need to keep sending a little email every now and then and saying, nothing's really happened, but we just wanted to check in, let you know, here's where we're at. And that's all it takes, really, to make people feel more comfortable. And to not sort of let things brew and think that the city's not being transparent with us. Yeah, I guess, again, just value and respect all participants' perspectives, getting back to that, be curious and learn, and not defend that preconceived outcome that you might be hoping for yourself, or your boss is pushing you, or whatever, yeah. Be clear and open. When you don't know, say you don't know. See if somebody else can find an answer, or maybe direct them to a resource where they can find an answer. Just gonna break here really quick to just introduce this spectrum of public participation. This is the International Association for Public Participation puts this out, and it's people around the world thinking about the best ways to do public participation. It's not perfect, but it's evolving too, but it's a good framework, and it's really important for transparency and trust. It can help to set and manage expectations, plan strategies, and build collaboration, and it connects with a lot of the different values. I'm not gonna, this is too many words for a slide, I recognize that. You have it in your handout, and maybe just take a look at it at some point, but this is really looking at the spectrum of what you're gonna do with the information that you get from the folks that you involve, and the way I like to frame it that's the easiest is, what is your promise to them about what you're gonna do with the information you're giving them? Are you just trying to inform them? Are you actually involving them to where their information is gonna get filtered into the process somehow? Are you empowering them, saying, you tell us what to do and we're gonna do it? So that we can get into a lot of trouble talking to the public when we don't make it really clear what this promise is. Because if we're thinking we're just informing people or consulting with them, and they think they're being empowered to make a decision, but we haven't stated that, you'll get bit in the end. So in the 3-hour workshop that I do with folks, I actually make them write their promise. And interestingly, with the planning division, in one of their promises, they included the county in their promise. And I was like, oh, like, can you really promise that the county's going to do that? Or do you need to like take that out or put some different language in there, because we don't really have jurisdiction over ultimately what the county would do. So impact and action, this really goes back to that promise that we're making. We just want to clearly define and communicate that, and it links again with the trust that we're building. I think bullet 2 really speaks to boards and commissions too, about the policies and types and levels of service. There's a direct connection there to what commissions are doing. And then I just think it's also really important to understand and respect the impacts, and not only the positive impacts, but also the negative impacts that these different decisions and policies might have on folks. And around impact and action, again, I'm going to go back to the police chief hiring, because I think that was a really good process. I participated in, I'm sure many of you were there too, there were community group interview tables, and I was the facilitator for the People of Color table, where those folks, and there were various other tables as well, and they got to meet and ask questions and come up with questions for the top 3 candidates. And I think, and then that was integrated into the decision-making process, and that's just a really good example of how we involve folks from more marginalized communities in making a decision and being really clear about how that impacts the decision. The last one is kind of the more fuzzy one, but it's just, it's really essential to the health of our community and the health of our institution, because we're public servants, to continue building this a sustained engagement and participatory culture that's inclusive. We're doing it now while I'm talking to you, just learning, ongoing education, the bullet 2 there. And it's really critical. It's hard work sometimes. Sometimes I think it's important to recognize that sometimes we'll fail. We'll create something and try and learn as a community. I think some of the pieces that I talked about involving community, diverse communities in creating processes, are going to help you then to say, if something doesn't work out, then it's not just the city did this bad, but it's like, oh, we didn't get it right, let's try again as a community, instead of just like the city failed at doing this. So really, that just brings me back to this, and that's kind of the end of the slides. So we can just, however much time we have, and I don't know how much time we have, but we can just chat about questions people have, or if they want to talk about a particular community or context. I can answer off the cuff, or I can go away and think about it a little bit more too.
So to start out with, I think a lot of this is going to be applicable to our community outreach, as well as the diversity, equity, and inclusion speakers and priorities we've got coming up. So thank you so much for coming in. I saw Silver's hand.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, for those of you who don't know, Lorna's son and my son went to school together, and I know that he was playing soccer with him during lunch, so that's why I said soccer mom. I didn't mean it in any kind of offensive way.
I got that. It's okay.
No,
I am a soccer
he might have moved on from that. I don't know.
No, he is
I know
not.
Silverio's
He's
not a
full
soccer
on
kid. I'm not a soccer dad anymore. I'm now he's in a band, so.
Yeah.
There was some discussion about the Human Rights International Day of Human Rights Recognition the other day, and that was okay. The attendance was fine, but there weren't a lot of people there.
And just to be clear, that's something that the Human Rights Commission organizes.
Right. So, I think we're moving to a place where those discussions can take place in this community, and people are aware of them, and we're showing up. But it sort of goes both ways, is what I feel. Like LULAC, my organization, had a piñata festival. We put it out to the whole community, and you know, we made it a safe space for the Latino, Latina community, but there weren't anybody else from really any other communities that showed up. And that's fine. That's cool, but it kind of goes both ways, I feel.
Yeah, it is true, and that's Silverio makes a good point that that is one in one of the cultural responsiveness pieces, or it's like learning about a community you want to engage. One of the best ways to learn about that community is to go to one of the events that they might be putting on and see what it's about and talk to people. And you might feel a little uncomfortable because you're out of your culture, but that's good because that's what a lot of folks have to experience every day with our dominant culture.
And there was a lot of good food and you all missed out on.
That's the best part,
That's
yes.
fine with me.
So I'd like to ask a little bit about, one of the things we run into is that we have the Human Rights Commission. So Amanda is here from them. As we incorporate, the same values of the community into our policy making, what would be the best way to identify policies? Because my goal going forward is to identify policies and make it more of a collaborative process in what policies we look at in coordination with this diversity, equity, and inclusion piece as well. So it's an open question. I don't have any answers.
Yeah, well, I love that the commissions have this crossover these days. I think that's really important. And kind of like what we said when we were talking about having like one person on your commission, I think it's also, we have to be careful not to just depend on the Human Rights Commission for input on things. They're definitely a good source, but not the only source. And just speaking staff to staff with Jeremy too, like if there is something coming up where you're really wanting diverse participation or specifically input from a specific community, you can feel free to reach out to our office for some pointers or some introductions to folks that we work with and things like that. Or, I can do a little consultation about some ideas about how to go about it, again, community and kind of context specific, but
I'm excited to have that connection.
yeah.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Is this?
Can only you guys say something?
Unfortunately, yes. The public.
Well, it said public inclusion.
So, if nobody else has any questions for Lorna, I'd like to thank you. And if you're more than welcome to stick around as we move into the community outreach update, because I feel like they're a little bit related.
Would you like me to? I'll stick around if people want me to.
I would.
Yes.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Yeah, okay, sure.
So, moving on to the community outreach update, I will start. I made it to two things. One was First Friday Communities of Color at the Campbell Center. I ran into Silver.
Probably my colleague Fabio.
Yes.
Yeah.
I ran into Fabio. We've had him in here as well before. And then I also went to Wake Up Eugene. So at the two of these, I did feel that sort of not in my element as much. Fortunately, I think Silver was there to introduce me to people, and I had a couple friends in the room already. But at the Wake Up Eugene, I noticed a large contingent of people who had been at our meeting, but I also heard great comments about the shelter care, the upcoming homelessness funds that we've got to address the long-term problem, and it was not a terribly contrarian group, or not as bad as I had feared it would be, as far as like anger was concerned. The chief did an excellent report talking about restorative justice, so we might want to look at that later as well. And that's all I've done in the last month. Silver?
Yeah, to speak to that, so thank you. I mentioned to Sean at the Community Color event that it's hard for me to be the person that's always going to return to this table and say, I did this. Because I've already been there, and I've already done the work. And it's not on me to go out to the community and say, hey, we're doing this as a police commission. So thank you. I know I'm being really I feel like I'm being really toxic tonight, but I'm not. I'm trying not to be. But at the Human Rights Commission event.
The International Human Rights Day.
Yes. Oblio from Transponder brought up that we approached them I feel it was a year and a half ago, and Scott returned to this room and said there was some concern, and I think at this point that we should reach out again to them and ask if they would like to present or be here at the table with us, because it came up.
Okay.
So.
Based on what Lorna said, I think we need to, instead of this completed, yes, committed, I think we need to have date of last contact on here. Like, when was the last time that we interfaced with these groups? And we need to take all the yellow committed off, because remember, we deleted all those because they were like people that weren't even on the commission sometimes. So the yellow needs to be all gone because we've reset. But I think that would be very helpful, because we could look down the list and go, oh no, it's been a year since we talked to these folks. They need to be our priority because we've talked to, or, we can decide. Because once is not, I don't think, like Lorna said, once is not acceptable. It's a continued conversation, so.
Awesome. On that note as well, do we feel that this is the best format for the diversity, equity, and inclusion discussion? Or should it be rolled in with our community outreach? Because it sounds like that might be, going to them might be a little bit more, a good supplement to, specific police-related policy and procedure invitees, if that makes sense. If I was clear, rather. All right. I'll think more on that and ask again when I have a better idea.
I don't understand
Do
to
you
what
mean,
end?
like, instead of inviting people to come here to
Yeah.
speak at this table, to go out to where people are? Or are you saying to supplement inviting people to come to this table by going out to where people are?
Exactly. Maybe coordinate the two.
Okay.
I really thank you for being our guinea pig on this.
Oh, sure.
We try to hammer out some of these details. Yeah, please.
Can I make a comment to
Please.
that? One strategy might be to find an event or a meeting or something for the different groups and go to them and just say, ask them, how would you like to be engaged with the commission? We want to do better about hearing from you. Would you like to be invited to our meeting? Would you like us to come once in a while to your meeting? Or, just kind of let them, because again, it's kind of like they'll define what feels best for them.
And we're only doing this once a quarter, right? So
Right.
that's every 3 months, so I
This
think that's,
version of it, yeah.
I mean, we don't even have to do a full hour. The reason I brought it up at the retreat when we did bring it up was that I appreciate these conversations because I feel a little bit safer. And that's why maybe I feel like I seem as though I'm coming off as toxic, but you've kind of opened me up. Having Lorna in the room has opened me up to that side. So I appreciate these conversations, and I appreciate that we're having these conversations. And I would like to continue them, even if it's once or twice a year. So.
Yes.
Can I ask a logistical, procedural question? This might be answerable by the bylaws, but I don't really feel like hunting through them. So if we go out, as people who are part of this body to some of these organizations or groups, can we say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm not here, as an official representative, but I am on the police. You see what I'm saying? There's these, I think that the chair and the vice chair have different ways that they're allowed to communicate publicly about their position, right? And do media outreach and that kind of stuff. But what about just in this public outreach, sort of what was the body's desire? That it just be the chair and vice chair who's doing this, that all of us do it and we go out sort of with our police commissioner hat on, or can you clarify?
The way I understood the goals was, to say, I can take, consulting. I can take your concerns back to the commission and voice them. There's, as I said, some issues as we hammer this out. I know Matt recently went to a neighborhood meeting where they asked us to send somebody back. Has that made any progress, by the way?
It hasn't. The information's been given to them for consideration.
Perfect. And then, doing that extra effort to reach folks that are a little bit more marginalized than the neighborhood associations as well.
Can I speak to that?
Yes, please.
So the reason we are doing this was, it was a conversation that came up 2 years ago, and it was just about building up relationships so that we can bring in more people from different backgrounds, so that we're not just like, hey, you got you this, you got you that. We're trying to build this police commission to diversify it. So that's part of the reason why we've been doing this. And in my outreach, I have just gone into the room and said, look, I'm not here in any official capacity. I'm a person who's on this committee or on this commission, and we'd like to start building a relationship. And that's it. And if they have a question or a bunch of questions, then they've asked a bunch of questions.
Yeah, and I will also piggyback on what Silver was saying is when we were the three of us were at the Pride event, I would say, 95% of people had no idea who we were. So it's also that element of just, you can't go and ask someone or give input if you don't know they exist, right? So we're kind of at that point, at least at that particular event with that particular group of people.
There's also the element of not relying entirely on the Human Rights Commission, especially as life happens, as has happened with previous designees to our commission. Anybody else have any other community outreach that they've done over the last month, or any other comments about the process that they would like to share?
Nothing new, but I went to the Southeast Community Association meeting about a year ago, and my impression is those people didn't know about a police commission. They and those are sort of middle class or upper middle class people, and there must have been 40 people in the room. They didn't know, and so it's not as though we need to outreach only to smaller disadvantaged communities. I think I kind of think the whole community can use this kind of information.
Can I just make it, so our office, human rights and neighborhood involvement, we work with more marginalized communities and then also with neighborhood associations a lot. And I think you're right, there's a lot of turnover in neighborhood associations, so sometimes people are not clear, they're new and they don't know what exists, so it can be a really, I think although those groups tend to be much more plugged in to city services and city things, we actually have a newsletter that goes out to neighborhoods and folks who are from marginalized communities that we put out so if there's something that you want, you can submit something to us and we'll put it in that. A lot of times neighborhood associations write their own newsletters too, if you submit a little information article or something like that. So I'm just saying that because in general, outreach can be really time consuming. So just thinking about, I think neighborhood associations, there are really good ways that are not as time consuming to get information out to them because our office exists and the city funds them for newsletters and things like that. Some of the harder to reach groups, it's a little harder, it can take a little bit more time. Not to say you shouldn't go out and talk to them, but I'm just trying to give you, because I know even from my experience, it's time consuming. Yeah, there are fewer barriers and there are electronic ways to get information out. Just in case you didn't know that.
Thank you.
I was actually going to say exactly that. Don't we still have that thing? I can't believe I'm going to say this coming from neighborhood associations. I think that perhaps we are spending too much time on this particular group when it would be easier to do that and maybe make a presentation at NLC every once in a while where they could then, upon their own, if they were interested, could contact us, because they're, as Lorna has said, they're a much more plugged in group, and we have many responsibilities and almost only so much time. And then we could concentrate on the groups that need a little more effort on our part to connect with, and not spending so much time running around all these 20-some neighborhood associations. So that is my 2 cents.
Awesome. Well, I think that is all for today. We're a little bit early, but time for closing comments. And we'll start. Thank you so much for coming, Lorna.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here.
And thank you so much to everybody who's come and participated as we try to figure this out, as I sort of ramble my way through sometimes. Bill?
Just thank everybody, and thanks for being the new employees of DC Judson. I'll be a senior staff member now that's just been here forever.
Of your
Thank you.
Brother, you want to make a comment?
Oh, sir. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And I just have to say, if that's your version of toxic, you're my cup of tea.
I have no comment.
Nice to meet you both. And thank
Nice
you all
to meet
for
you.
being here. That's all.
Nothing.
Thanks for the information presented tonight, and welcome, Captain Adams.
Thanks, Lorna, for coming.
Absolutely. It's helpful.
Yeah, the presentations were really, really informative. I wanted to say thank you to everyone who came to International Human Rights Day. Definitely, I saw you there. I had to leave early, so I missed most of the discussion, but it was a pretty good event.
Yeah.
Our HRC's Poverty and Homelessness Work Group is working on a few different things, but one of the things we're working on is putting together a film series on homelessness that we're going to start in January and hopefully run through the spring. So as we start solidifying that, I'll bring more information about that. And otherwise, yeah, it should be really great. There's a lot of energy and enthusiasm around this topic right now. So every meeting I'm in, that's like all we talk about.
Who's making the movies?
They are movies that I
Local?
No, it's an already made film series, and they encourage you to do like a discussion along with it. So, but yeah, I'll bring more information next time. And then otherwise, HRC is working on electing a chair, so that's taking up most of our meetings.
Oh, I don't know.
Let's.
Sorry, you're in a round.
Silver? Or, sorry, V?
Thank you, Lorna, for the information. That was really, really interesting, and I love your visual presentation, in the PowerPoint. And Captain Adams, thank you for coming to Eugene.
Thank you. So I went to the Human Rights Commission thing, and I've tried 3 times to be on the Human Rights Commission, and I just keep getting denied. And I want to join that after I leave here. And when I leave here, I want to know that we're going to have I like thinking of things in the terms of baseball. I like baseball. And, if you have a farm system and you're building that bench, then you know that when you leave, you're going to have that pipeline of people that are going to fill in those spaces. And I've enjoyed my time here. And I know I'll be here for a few more years, I think. But, I actively look forward to building the bench so that we can have more people from different perspectives in this room. So, thank you for coming and speaking, and it's nice meeting you. Thank you. Yeah.
And thank you, and I'm glad to have the handout. That's always a nice addition, and welcome to Eugene.
Thank you.
Silver, maybe we'll get lucky enough to have you fill in for Amanda. when her term is over.
Yeah.
You can just do both.
Yeah.
Especially now that you've really opened up. I've got nothing else.
I just want to know the team.
Dodgers.
How's there not no-
I just wanted to offer that I know the police department has a table at the Public Safety Forum that we do in Spanish, and if the police commission wanted to have a table or join with the EPD table or the auditor, I mean, we could talk about that, so that's an opportunity. Somebody that speaks Spanish, though, would have to. And then also, we're having a table with the auditor's office at the Asian celebration, and we're kind of putting together a sign-up sheet, and some of the human rights commissioners are going to sign up too. So, if anybody wants to sign up and be there and talk to folks,
Where are you doing it? I usually perform there.
Okay.
And so I'll be there, but.
I'll send the sign-up sheet to Jeremy and see if any of you want to participate.
And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Hasta la pasta.